They are continuing to plea for some sort of pressure to put on Muammar Gaddafi or the Libyan regime in order to end what they are calling a massacre in broad daylight, but that has been blacked out by Gaddafi's ensuring that no media is able to broadcast what is taking place inside the capital, where it's difficult to figure out any numbers, but there are numbers coming in from people saying tens of people, if not hundreds, have been killed. Obviously, we can't verify that, but there is definitely some sort of horrific scenes that are taking place there today, possibly worse than we've seen in the past 48 hours or so, because of this sheer reaction coming out from the people who have been able to make it to this border here. Kamal.
Jamal, broad question for you, but I would like the context of what happens to a person when they step over that border. What do they do as soon as they get out of Libya?
Well, it really does differ depending on what kind of person. I mean, we've seen the Egyptian migrant workers and laborers that come and as soon as they cross this border will prostrate onto the ground and kiss the ground because they're happy to be home. We've seen the Libyans who've managed to smuggle across images and videos of what's taking place and with a camera, or any foreigner who may seem to be an international journalist, and hand it over to them and say, this is something we entrust you with, that we've risked our lives to bring to you. It really does differ, but all of them without exception come with stories of horror, come with stories of death and destruction that are taking place across the country. Although the east has subsided and we've seen through the pictures of the anti-Gaddafi parades or demonstrations that have taken place today on Friday. However, on the west and central country, inside Libya, there is still that violence that continues to rage inside the country. Kamal.
That's Jamal Al-Shail with a live update from the Egypt-Libya border. Saloom there. Thanks, Jamal. Protests against corruption and a lack of basic services turned deadly. This is Iraq, though, we're looking at. At least 2 people have been killed in the northern city of Hawija, and in Baghdad, protesters have been squaring off against riot police. This report is from Tarek Bazley.
The spirit of protest very much alive in Iraq. Despite the capital and virtual security lockdown, thousands took to the streets. Their day of rage inspired by recent events in North Africa.
Our demands is the following. First, prevent corruption by making laws to prevent that and apply it correctly for the favourite of the Iraqi people.
Soldiers searched protesters trying to enter Liberation Square. They barricaded a bridge leading to the city's so-called Green Zone government area. At one point, protesters threw stones at riot police, who forced them back against the wall. In the southern city Basra, around 3,000 also took to the streets to protest against corruption and a lack of basic services. Concrete slabs surrounding the Basra government building were knocked over. Clashes too with riot police in Mosul, where provincial government offices were set on fire. 8 years after the US-led invasion and the fall of Saddam Hussein, there's clear anger on the streets. Development has been slow to come to the country, and after recent events in the region, there are fears that anger could drive a broader call for change. Tarek Bazley, Al Jazeera.
That's Iraq. A couple of weeks ago, our focus was squarely on Egypt. Do not think it has stopped there, though. Egyptians keeping up pressure on their transitional government. Many thousands out in Tahrir Square in Cairo, Liberation Square, after Friday prayers. They want the military leaders to appoint a new cabinet and lift the decades-old emergency rule. Azza Sukri with more.
Cairo's most famous square, once again filled with thousands of Egyptians. A month to the day since the tidal wave of protests swept President Hosni Mubarak from power, the calls for change have yet to die down. Officially, the gathering was to celebrate the success of the revolution. This amateur video showed street vendors and a generally calm atmosphere. But activists used it as an opportunity to maintain pressure on military rulers over promised reforms.
We're asking for the rest of the demands to be met, which is to dismantle the state security investigation to have Shafi resign and to say no to the emergency law. Also to protect our right of the demonstrations and right to be in the streets.
They also called for Mubarak to be put on trial and the release of political prisoners. It was a clear reminder of the discontent sweeping through the Middle East. So many leaders now facing the wrath of their citizens. Azhar Sukri, AlJazeera.
They're still there too. It's 6:15 in the evening in Cairo at the moment. The numbers still strong, still protesting. They're, I would dare say, used to it now after so much protesting in Tahrir Square for so long, keeping up the pressure on that transitional military government in Egypt. Keep moving around the region. Yemen, where hundreds of thousands of pro and anti-government activists staged rival rallies in Sana'a. Thousands have also been marching against President Saleh in towns and cities across the country. Earlier, he ordered the formation of a committee to open talks with protesters, demanding he step down. From Sana'a, Hashim Al-Barra with more.
It was a show of force by both sides of Yemen's growing political divide. President Saleh's supporters turned out for their biggest rally so far. And according to a spokesperson, the president was ready for talks.
The President Saleh has ordered and instructed his police forces to step up the security and full protection of the protesters and demonstrations. But the government view that the dialogue is the key to a better future for the people of Yemen.
But it wasn't the message those calling for reform wanted to hear. Outside Sana'a University, one demonstrator explained.
And we are now passing the message to our president and to the world and to all Yemeni everywhere that we are requesting the change, the whole change. This president and his family, they have to leave, they have to give the right to the people.
The beleaguered president is relying on his supporters who live outside the capital, his security forces and his ruling party to counter the growing demands for his resignation. He's already promised he'll stand down in 2 years, but not until then. With both sides holding out, a sense of anxiety pervades the country.
The capital, Sana'a, holds the key to President Saleh's survival. That's why he's so desperate to show the world such large demonstrations of support. But that's unlikely to change many minds here at such a critical moment in Yemen and beyond. Hashim Al-Barra, AlJazeera, Sana'a.
So let's summarise then what you've seen over the last 15 minutes or so across the region through the Middle East. Thousands rallying in eastern Libyan cities, now controlled by Gaddafi's opponents. They are supporting protesters in Tripoli who were fired on by troops and militia loyal to the Libyan leader. Then we've got Iraq, growing frustration over food, water, electricity, job shortages. It all boiled over during what they called a day of rage there. Several died in clashes between protesters and security forces around the country. Egypt, where they're keeping up the pressure on the military rulers, tens of thousands back out in Cairo demanding quick reforms from that government. And finally, Yemen. Protests against the president there spread to towns and cities around the country, with deaths reported at a rally in Aden. That's in the south, of course. Going to look at a couple of other countries now as well. This is Jordan, where thousands of protesters hit the streets on Friday demanding political and economic reform. Around 5,000 people holding a rally in Amman amid a strong police presence. They are calling for constitutional change, in particular a limit on the powers of the monarch, King Abdullah. The government has recently introduced financial and political concessions to prevent a spillover of anti-government protests in neighbouring countries. And Tunisia, where arguably it all started, thousands filling the streets of central Tunis in another day of rage there. This is against Muammar Gaddafi and his crackdown on Libyans. Also called for the resignation of former loyalists from Tunisia's interim government, including the Prime Minister Mohamed Ghannouchi. So Libya, we want to return to the uprising there, which has triggered a refugee crisis as tens of thousands just get out of the country. A short time ago, we heard from Antonio Guterres, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, who says the main concerns are for those unable to get out.
For the moment, we had about 40,000 people crossing both the Tunisian border and the Egyptian border. The large majority are Tunisian citizens and Egyptian citizens going back to their countries of origin. but we are having some Libyans crossing too, and we are having also nationals from other countries. And what we are very, very much worried about is with the fact that a lot of people are trapped inside the area of Tripoli. They cannot escape, and we are witnessing a carnage. We are witnessing a terrible bloodshed, and in the worst affected areas there is not even a possibility to flee. We also know of Libyans that tried to cross the border into Tunisia, and the Libyan forces around the border were still controlled by the government, not allowing them to flee. So that is indeed a big concern for us, is that people are suffering horribly, and those that are really suffering horribly are not being able to flee, and we have not the capacity to assist them.
Tariq Yusuf in the studio with us, a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute in Washington. Lovely to have you with us to talk through some of this. So much to talk through. Yeah. And actually, I'll tell you a tweet that I got earlier, someone who just said, what protests, which country? Yeah. And that is a really fair thing to say, because we've just looked at Jordan. Tunisia's still going along, Egypt's still going on. It just keeps moving.
Absolutely. And I think the end is not near for what is happening in the Arab world. I think we're probably looking at the most important event in the modern Middle East, certainly since the 1950s in the post-independence era. We've never seen this outpour of public expression, demanding not only handouts, economic handouts, or partial political changes, but demanding a dramatic, comprehensive remaking of their societies. This we need to take note of outside of the Middle East and take it for what it is, that the Arab world, for the first time perhaps in the modern era, is re-establishing a domestic order with profound implications for the world at large.
To that end, what do you think of some of the other reaction? We're looking at pictures of Libya here where the numbers are huge, the people are angry. Just a moment ago we saw Jordan, where the protesters are out, it's a bit more peaceful and the government's already made some concessions. Is it reacting in the right way to avert something like this which we're seeing?
Well, the ultimate test is whether these piecemeal steps taken by governments will be sufficient at the moment to contain the anger and to accommodate the frustrations. Arab governments have spent the last 20 years, I would say wasted the last 20 years, engaging in these piecemeal steps. They proved often hesitant, partial, and they were reversible. Hence, the protesters in Cairo demanded nothing short of the resignation of President Mubarak and nothing short of the remaking of Egypt as it existed prior. My fear is the publics throughout the region are engaged in a similar act